the most famous of which was a gardener who was flying to Houston to buy some shrubs, and because he fit the profile, he pulled out a... Now I have to sneak around from the back, so the years are marching on. I can't acknowledge everyone here that I know. It would take the entire time. I would like to, though. So many good friends, people I haven't seen in some years, and people whom I see quite frequently. But I thank you all for coming. Expectations, for some strange reason, are always high on what I'm going to say, and I don't think this will be very newsworthy, so the cameras can go home if they want. But I am delighted to be here and share with you some ideas and answer some questions. First of all, I think Tom Roser is a brave person. He invites a politician to address his group, and he knows the definition of a politician. That's someone who can accuse his opponent of duplicity without appearing envious. In Washington, you know, we have focus groups and pollsters, and we change our approach to things depending on the way the wind blows. And for example, we don't call older folks senior citizens anymore. We say they're chronologically gifted. And as one who is chronologically gifted, I particularly enjoy grandfather stories. I enjoy the story of the two little kids who said to their grandfather, "Grandpa, can you make a sound like a frog?" He said, "No, why do you ask?" And they said, "Well, Grandma says when you croak, we go to Disneyland." Two little kids are in the bedroom talking. They sleep in the same bedroom, and they, as kids will do before they drop off, they have their little conversations. And the one kid says, "Billy, you know, I'm not tough enough. I'm kind of sissified. I've got to toughen up." Said, "Tomorrow morning at breakfast, I'm going to say hell." The other kid says, "Well, if you do, I'll say damn." So the next morning they go to breakfast. Mother says, "Billy, what do you want for breakfast?" He says, "Oh, what the hell, Cheerios." She gives him a whack. She gets the soap out, washes the mouth out, spanks him, puts him down, and now says, "And you, Roger, what do you want?" He says, "Well, I damn sure don't want Cheerios." I guess by now you've got the tenor of my remarks today. One of my very favorite human beings was the late, wonderful W.C. Fields, who said, "It was a woman who drove me to drink, and I never properly thanked her." Gene Fowler, who was a great writer and was Fields' bosom buddy, went to see W.C. Fields at the old actors' home some weeks before Mr. Fields passed on, and he found Fields thumbing through a Bible, which was very uncharacteristic of Fields, who was noted for his rigorous atheism. And so Fowler said, "What are you doing, Bill?" And Fields said, "Looking for a loophole, looking for a loophole." Tip O'Neill, who was a great Republican speaker, Democratic speaker, but he was speaker of both the Republicans and the Democrats. Tip had a great saying. Of course, I used to get confused with Tip quite a lot. People would come up to me and say, "How are you, Mr. Speaker?" And I would be torn whether I should turn on them and straighten them out or just say fine. And so a lot of people think I'm the speaker. But in any event, he said all politics are local, and he was on to something. Out where I come from, Bob Schillerstrom is here, the president of the DuPage County Board. We have a suburban community, and each township takes care of local problems in their own way. Now, Addison Township, where I live, they have a commissioner of weeds, a weed commissioner. What they do is they get an elderly, a chronologically challenged gentleman who is retired, and they appoint him commissioner of weeds. And he is to look around the township, and if he finds any lots that are overgrown with weeds, he is to cut them down, and he gets a stipend, a modest stipend for being weed commissioner. Well, we appointed one, Pat Durante appointed one out in Addison Township, and this elderly gentleman was going to be the best weed commissioner that ever lived. And he scoured the area for weeds, and he found one particularly overgrown lot, rather large. He got a couple of kids with the proper implements, and they cut everything down. The problem was they were soybeans. The farmer was very incensed, was going to sue the township, and Pat took his weed commissioner back out to the scene of the crime, and he said, "Now, Commissioner, this is a weed." He said, "And if you're ever in doubt, just remember this rule of thumb. Weeds never grow in a straight line." And you haven't lived till you campaign with a fellow running for coroner. We went to a nursing home once, and there were some chronologically challenged folks there in their wheelchairs and all. And this candidate for coroner said, "I just want you to know I'm here for you." My favorite story, though, is Pam Harriman, who was walking through Lafayette Park across from the White House one day when a homeless gentleman roused himself from the grate he was sleeping on, ran up to her and said, "Lady, I haven't eaten in 3 days." She said, "I admire your willpower." You can tell the same story about Georgette Mossbacher. And the guy says, "I haven't eaten in 3 days," and she said, "You must force yourself." Let us talk about some of the interesting things that are pending in Washington. The focus has switched from you-know-what to more mundane things, but very important. Ballistic missile defense, for example. Something is happening out there in the world. The technology is becoming more and more available and widespread to develop ballistic missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Rogue states such as North Korea are developing fearsome weaponry. We received a briefing last week from Don Rumsfeld and a presidential commission that had been appointed to study the feasibility of a ballistic missile defense, and much of the briefing was classified, which is unfortunate because some of this stuff is very important, and it's important for the public to know. But suffice it to say, the development of very serious ballistic missiles that can carry nuclear warheads, chemical warheads, biological warfare warheads, and carry them an enormous distance is a reality, And so we have to start thinking about defending this country and defending our allies. The ability to manufacture these weapons of enormous force and terror potential has changed the globe somewhat. Smaller states have this power, the power to intimidate, and so we have to get serious about a defense. We have no defense if a ballistic missile were lobbed over the ocean or from a ship close to the shoreline into the United States. And they don't have to be terribly accurate. And these warheads, the lighter they are and the smaller they are, the farther they can be shot, transmitted, And so the development in China of the ability to miniaturize these warheads is very serious. What it means is they can shoot them farther and faster because they can miniaturize them. So all of this is something that you have to anticipate. You can't wait until the deed is done, so to speak. We are looking at that. We're looking at China. And of course, our intelligence facilities, resources are put to a very severe test. It costs a lot of money to buy satellites and hardware and satellites can only see certain things. They can't get underground. They haven't been able to find Saddam Hussein's storage places or factories for developing nuclear and biological warfare. And so we need human intelligence, which is the toughest to get. That takes years to develop. It takes people on the ground, or you break away people from within the organization. But it is a deadly game, and it is going on, and we have to pay attention to it. Believe me. Now, another problem is our readiness. There's a phrase they use called operational tempo. And what that means is speeding up the commitments of our military around the globe. And that is happening. Right now we are wrestling with Kosovo, which is a place of death and pain and suffering, where the Albanians are being shot up, bombed, their homes being destroyed by Serbians. But the Albanians are equally deadly in terms of their approach to the Serbians, and that's been going on for centuries. But meanwhile, about 400,000 people are without homes, and it's snowing and it's cold over there. 7,000 people killed since February. We are confronted with the problem of, do we just avert our eyes, or do we try to stop the killing, stop the genocide? Senator Dole was sent over by President Clinton as a special emissary, and he has come back, and he is very concerned about the refugees and the death toll over there, and whether or not we have a moral obligation to do anything about it. Well, NATO was founded to be a defensive organization against an aggressive Soviet Union. Now there is no aggressive Soviet Union. The question is, does NATO still have a function? And if it does, is its function to go in and keep the peace? Those are the matters that we're going to debate. We have debated, and we'll debate them some more. It's not our fight, it's the Europeans' fight. All of that is, of course, true. But it could be our fight if the war spills beyond Albania, the ethnic Albanians and the Serbians. You have a very serious religious split over there, the Muslims and the non-Muslims. You have the Turks and the Greeks, who are both members of NATO, both not very friendly with each other and having these serious religious difficulties to add on to the ethnic cleansing and the other problems. So the world is still a very difficult place, and our role in it has not diminished. So, as this operational tempo increases, are we ready for it? And the answer is no. Our readiness is very, very poor. We have this increase in the demands for our military to back up our foreign policy. You know, foreign policy isn't just diplomats and lawyers sitting at a table. You have to back up your positions with military strength. And that means you have to have a readiness capability. But the Joint Chiefs of Staff have said we are $150 billion short in essential commitments for over the next 6 years. The Army and the Marines are going into what's called O&M, operations and maintenance costs, to fund current projects, and this means they can't modernize, they can't get the training that they're supposed to have. The Navy is very short on recruits. They were short 7,000 from their goal in recruiting last year. People aren't re-enlisting. That's particularly true in the Air Force, where the airlines are grabbing these pilots as fast as they can. And you can't blame the pilots because the rewards, the salary and the insurance and the rest, plus the predictability of a schedule. It takes a real sacrifice to serve in the military today, and especially when the recruits, the retention rate is as poor as it is. You don't get relieved as promptly as you should. So in addition, we have an aging fleet of aircraft. We are losing experts who are avionics experts and crew chiefs. They're not re-enlisting, and this is very serious. It means we have to increase their pay. We have to have a more attractive pension setup, because servicemen and women are being called upon to do all sorts of things longer and harder and more onerous. We are lowering the standards for recruits, and we still aren't filling the quotas that we need. And so these are the sorts of problems that are serious and need to be addressed by Congress. Foreign policy, of course, we've talked about Kosovo. I'm very troubled about the Kosovo situation. The president wants to put 4,000 troops in with a 28,000 peacekeeping force of NATO members. The British would have 8,000 in, and that is a serious matter to debate, because what's the exit strategy? What are the rules of engagement? By that I mean you've got a Kosovo army that will not, Liberation Army, KLA, will not disarm. They want to keep their weapons so they can shoot Serbians. They don't want autonomy, they want independence. The Serbians will never give independence. So who do you shoot? How do you disarm them? Well, who do you bomb? How do you get out once you get in? How do you keep it from spreading beyond the Balkans? And what do you do about refugees wandering, little kids and elderly people wandering around the mountains in the snow? These are not easy problems. They are not easy problems, and they call for serious study, debate, and of course, leadership. The China question is bothersome, particularly since China is a nuclear power. China has been providing technology to Iran, to Pakistan. India and Pakistan are not happy with each other, and both flexing their nuclear muscles. The question of China is a burning one, because she is an enormous factor in terms of population and trading potential. We have a terrific trade deficit with China, however. Espionage, again, most of this stuff is classified, but I'm assured that it is very serious, and they have penetrated our laboratories rather successfully. Among scientists, you know, there is an attitude of sharing with everybody. Knowledge is the currency they deal with, and the political consequences of some of this sharing generally isn't considered. Couple of other issues I'd like to talk about, and then I'll try to take some questions. I don't know if any of you know it, but there is a process called civil asset forfeiture. And what it means is the government can take your property, your apartment building, your farm, your car, your yacht, upon probable cause. The flimsiest of charges, they can confiscate your property on the theory that it was involved in some crime. Say you own a rooming house with 1,000 units in, and somebody's selling dope. They take your house, and you can't get it back unless you can prove within 10 days that your premises were not involved. In other words, the burden of proof is on you the owner of the property rather than on the government to prove you're guilty. This results in some bizarre situations. The most famous of which was a gardener who was flying to Houston to buy some shrubs, and because he fit the profile, he pulled out a wad of money to buy his ticket in the Memphis airport. They questioned him, confiscated his money. They tested the money and found that there were drugs that they could detect that it had been near cocaine, but the truth is almost all money can be tested for that. They confiscated his money, and it took them about 1.5 years to get it back. They never even arrested him. So we're trying to change that. I have a bill that we're going to deal with very shortly that puts the burden of proof on the government, and that requires the government to appoint a lawyer for you if you don't have one, makes the government liable for damage to your property while they have it. And this will be an interesting battle because some of the police organizations oppose this since they profit from the proceeds of civil asset forfeiture. I've got the ACLU on my side, and I've got the libertarian, the far left and the far right, on my side, and so I'm walking right down the middle very carefully. 62 sponsors, and there's a bill I'm very proud of that we passed in '97, and it just paid off. I was instrumental in getting an amendment to an appropriation bill that said, if you are sued by the government, or if you're indicted by the government, and at the end of the testimony, the judge says this was a frivolous suit, it was vexatious, it was brought in bad faith, you can get your attorney's fees. Now that is an amendment that I was successful in getting on a bill, and the Justice Department fought tooth and nail, but because it was on an appropriation bill, the president signed it, and so just a month ago, here's a Richmond Times-Dispatch. A federal judge has ordered the government to reimburse State Senator Richard Holland, Democrat, and his son a total of $570,000 for legal costs they incurred while turning back bank fraud charges the judge called unjustified and designed mainly to harass. So once in a while, the good guys win. We have bankruptcy reform, very important, trying to adjust the fairness between debtors and creditors. We're dealing with that this week. We have the Y2K problem, which is really serious. I am computer illiterate, but I know that when the year 2000 hits, an awful lot of computers are going to be useless or worse than useless because of the inability to register the 2 zeros as representing 2000 rather than 1900. And they tell me this problem, and they call it the Y2K problem, is very serious overseas, where foreign countries aren't paying much attention to it, and this could have very serious implications on air travel. The financial institutions are okay. Social security checks will go out on time, but pharmaceutical industry is not okay. They import about 80% of their ingredients to manufacture the drugs, and Y2K compliance is the magic phrase, is something that's very lacking, especially overseas and in Asia. People aren't taking it seriously, but experts tell us it is serious. There was a special committee of senators headed by Robert Bennett of Idaho and Senator Chris Dodd of Connecticut, and they recently handed out a report that is pretty scary in its implications. The independent counsel law. If there weren't an independent counsel law, I'm not sure we'd have had the impeachment proceedings we just struggled through. But under the law, which was first passed in 1978, and which has a life of 5 years and then is renewed, and has been renewed since then except once. It wasn't renewed for a few years, then it was renewed again at the request of the Clinton administration. But the independent counsel law is due to expire at the end of June. And the big question is, should it expire or should we renew it? That is a problem that our committee will have to deal with. I don't know where I am on it. I was always a supporter of the independent counsel law because I felt the conflict of interest between a high government official such as the president or a member of the cabinet and the attorney general who would be charged with prosecuting a criminal charge against such a high person provided an impossible conflict of interest, and the independent counsel law was a way to get around that. And while theoretically that's true, it is true that the independent counsel is a strange breed of cat who has no accountability, endless funds, and has created, in my judgment, a situation that calls for a real hard look as to whether we should reauthorize it or not. I felt that after Judge Walsh in the Iran-Contra hearings, because there were, in my judgment, abuses that occurred there. There may well be abuses with the present independent counsel, although I think there are far fewer than have been charged, but I'm keeping an open mind on that. But we're holding hearings on the independent counsel. The problem with it is a conceptual one. You appoint one person and he's got one target, and his whole operation is dedicated to going after you. And it is true, of all the independent counsels, most of them have found no cause of action and have had the professional decency to say so. But the Walsh experience and the Starr experience, where you go 5 years for Starr, 7 years for Walsh, about $48 million Walsh spent. Starr has spent $33 million. We just wonder whether that's useful or not. So we're going to hold hearings on it. I'm inclining less and less to support it, but I don't want to commit myself right now. But as you can see, we have a full plate. We have lots of things ahead of us, and I think we can get along. I have not noticed a lot of residual animosity between the parties at all. There is among professional haters and defenders, but the members of Congress want to come home with a record of accomplishment. There are so many problems: saving Social Security, making it keeping it solvent, Medicare, education, and the people send us there to solve these problems, not to spit at each other over partisan political issues. And I think Denny Hastert, our new speaker, is ideally situated to get people to work together. He's a marvelous man. He is not abrasive. He doesn't have a rough edge to him. He knows how to get people together and bring out the best in them, and he won't be the visible pyrotechnic lightning rod that we had before, said he, searching for words. But he'll do a good job, and I think the country will be the beneficiary. Now I will try to take questions.
You've answered a lot of them, but we'll get to those. First of all, I should announce that this speech is being covered on cable TV, and it's going to be shown, it's going to be shown on CAN TV 19, Saturday, April 24, so a little time will elapse. The first question is, assess the seriousness of the substance of the soon-to-be-released Cox Committee report.
I've talked to Mr. Cox, Chris Cox, a very bright congressman from California who headed a select committee to study the Chinese problem vis-a-vis espionage, and he tells me it is very serious. He regretted that it was most of the stuff was classified and couldn't discuss it. They are right now negotiating for declassification of what they can. But suffice it to say, the Chinese penetration of our top secret laboratories has been every bit as serious as the Rosenbergs and the other. It is serious.
Two questions on the same. So one is, how should we deal with Chinese abuse of women and forced abortions? And the other from Father Ryan is, will Congress attempt again to overturn the president's partial birth abortion veto?
I don't know about the second one. We've been up and down a few times. Unless we have the votes in the Senate, we fell 3 votes short over there on the override of partial birth abortion. Partial birth abortion, for those of you who may not know what that is, it's a very gruesome thing. The baby is almost delivered from the birth canal except the head. A breech birth is induced and the baby is almost delivered. The abortionist then takes a surgical scissors, puts an opening in the back of the neck, and the brains are drawn out, the head collapses. It's horrible. And we attempted to have it rendered illegal. We passed bills forbidding it, but and the president vetoed them. We overrode the veto in the House, but the Senate fell 3 votes short. As you know, you need 2/3 to override. I don't know if we'll do it again. We don't want to let the issue go. If the majority of the members want it, why we'll do it. What was the first?
The Chinese human rights thing, women and abortion there.
Well, they have a policy over there of, I think is it 1 child?
Yeah.
And if you get pregnant, why they force an abortion or they force sterilization. I've interviewed Chinese refugees. One woman picked up a little girl who was thrown away by the side of the road, but because she already had a child, why they sterilized her and she fled the country. Another woman lived in a cave for about 8 months to avoid that. It's just a different attitude the Chinese have. They believe they have a population problem and that's their way of solving it. But it is barbarous, and I don't know what we can do. I don't vote for MFN for China out of a protest for their lack of human rights treatment. I mean, it isn't just on the abortion issue; it's in political issues, religious issues. They're in the true Stalin mode.
Your thoughts on why the polls continue to show the president with high approval?
We have a commercial celebrity culture where athletes, pop movie stars, rock singers, celebrities are just treated differently, that's all. And I think the O.J. Simpson trial showed that. Mary McGrory had a great line. She said, "People vote Dow Jones, not Paula Jones." Bribery or other high crimes and misdemeanors. What you're probably getting at is a resolution of censure, which was the alternative. They wanted to get a vote on that in the House, and the senators also wanted to vote on a censure. The problem with a censure is there are about 3 problems. One is it's not in the Constitution. The only sanction that Congress can impose on a president is impeachment. There's no specification in a in a document of enumerated powers for censure. Secondly, there's a prohibition against a bill of attainder. And a censure resolution is a bill of attainder. A bill of attainder is a specific law passed for a specific person, punishing somebody for something that has gone on. That's forbidden expressly in the Constitution. And any resolution of censure would have to punish the president, if only his reputation. And so it would be unconstitutional, in my judgment, as a bill of attainder. Thirdly, we have a doctrine of separation of powers. You have the legislature, the courts, and the executive. And we shouldn't infringe on the executive, nor on the judiciary. And if we start censuring the president for his conduct, where does it stop? It would become a political weapon. Every Congress would be censuring the president, right and left, and it's just not appropriate. So I didn't think a resolution of censure, particularly since it would be contrary to the Constitution. You either impeached him and voted it up or down or not, and that's what happened.
In hindsight, would you call witnesses to testify in the impeachment proceedings?
We were faced with a problem. First of all, time. It was September when this material was sent over to us by the independent counsel, September 9th to be exact. Now, we ran out of money and authority at the end of the year in January 1st. So we had Christmas intervening and a major election intervening and Thanksgiving intervening. And nobody wanted a big, long trial. So we had to move ahead as quickly as we could. Now, for the first time in history, we had an independent counsel who did the investigating, took the testimony under oath, grand jury testimony, depositions, statements, documents. It was all there. He had already done that. I don't want to name names, but there were witnesses who were very critical to the obstruction of justice, but we had them under oath. Why reinvent the wheel? Well, because it's more dramatic. It's more graphic. People could see it, put a face on this testimony rather than just reading from the pages. But because of the time constraints and my hope that we could finish by the end of the year on the House side, before we ran out of authority and money, we felt that we could accept the independent counsel's evidence, which was under oath, and proceed from there. Now, the Rodino committee, when they did Nixon, they had the benefit of the Sam Ervin committee, which had 18 volumes of investigation and testimony and witnesses. They took another 9 months to get to the point where they issued articles of impeachment against Mr. Nixon. We didn't have the luxury of that time, or we didn't take the luxury of that time, because we were listening to people saying, let's get this behind us. The country doesn't need this. So we did. We had witnesses testify, but we used the documented corroboration of their transcripts to make the case for the resolution of impeachment. Now, when we got over to the Senate, the senators treated us like, well, I said we were like the reformed drunken uncle who everyone was kind of proud of, but don't hang around too much, you know. They welcomed us, but they kept a discreet distance. They didn't want us to spend too much of their precious time fulfilling the mandate of the Constitution. And so we could not have any witnesses unless they approved of them. They told us we could have 3. That was unofficial, but that's what they said. If we asked for more than 3, we'd probably get none. So we picked the 3 that we thought would be most adaptable to our purposes and went with the transcripts of the others. Whether the result would have been different or not, I don't know. I think there was a mindset in the country, and I think the senators followed that rather than the testimony. That's just my inexpert feeling.
Okay, 2 questions left. The Chicago region has grown by 505,000 in the last 8 years. This is the size of Cleveland. How do we serve this growth and continued growth without a third airport?
Not very well. We need a third airport badly. And there will be one. Many of you will live to see it and fly in and out of it, but the sooner the better, because the land is more land is available. It's more cheaply available. You can do more with it, plan an environmentally sound airport, one that has room to expand, get monorails connecting the airports, O'Hare, Midway, and wherever the other one is. I'm not married to Peatone, but I think we need it. The problem is O'Hare has over 900,000 flights in and out a year. You can't shoehorn any more in there with any degree of any confidence in safety, pollution, noise, and the rest. We have to have another airport. It was fine if the airport was going to be in Chicago. We passed a passenger facility tax to pay for that, and then when that fell through because it wasn't environmentally feasible, the passenger facility tax is still collected, but it's not spent for additional capacity. It is spent to enhance the terminal at O'Hare. We'll have a third airport. We need one. New York has 4, I guess, if you count Long Island and Newark and Idlewild, or Kennedy rather, and LaGuardia. We need 3, a healthy 3.
And the final question from the Alderman of the Super Ward, Bert Nateras over there. Give him a hand. This question is, given we are reaching the year 2000 wherein welfare payments will be curtailed, can we solve our military commitments and unemployment problems by instituting the draft or perhaps compulsory 2-year public service? Perhaps compulsory 2-year public service might solve some of our social problems.
Well, I wouldn't rule a draft out. We're not there yet, but if we can't recruit adequate to the commitments that are felt necessary to maintain our strength in the world, our leadership in the world, and our trade in the world, you need people to trade with too. I wouldn't say that isn't possible, but it isn't being discussed now, but it is possible. Let me leave you because I've got to run out to the airport, but let me share with you a true story that I think is touching. It is to me anyway. I was driving to work one morning in Washington. I heard a talk show on the radio, and it was Michael Reagan, Ronald Reagan's son, was being interviewed. And he said something that startled me. He said, "I used to hate America." He said, "I hated it because my dad always had time for America, but he never had time for me, for us kids." He said, and that always bothered me. He said, "One day I thought to myself, have I ever said to my father that I love him?" So next time I saw Dad, I went up and I put my arms around him and I squeezed him and I said, "Dad, I love you." He said, "Now today my father can't carry on a conversation. His health is good, his body is good, but he just can't carry on a conversation." But he said, every time I walk into the room, his eyes light up and he goes like this, which I think is a great way to end the speech. Thank you.